Hey guys, and welcome back. Today, we're going to be taking a look at Azure SQL Managed Instance, and specifically, we're going to take a look at the differences between the general purpose tier and the business critical tier. So let's get right to it. So when you go out to the Azure portal to provision Azure SQL Managed Instance, one of the key choices that you will have to make is whether you want to go with the general purpose tier or the business critical tier. So today, we're going to take a look at these two tier options here, and we're going to help ensure that you can make the best choice for your workloads. So we're going to be taking a look at the differences across the architecture for the two tiers, the high availability options, the hardware, storage, replicas, and the cost. So to start things off, let's take a look at the architecture for the general purpose tier. So looking at our diagram here in the bottom right corner, if we start here from the top left, we see that we have a application that needs to talk to our Azure SQL Managed Instance. So the first thing that the application will do is it's going to reach out to the gateway control rings to identify what particular replica it needs to access. Now, looking down lower here at the replica, we can see that we have one primary replica. We then have some spare nodes here that are each going to be running the SQL Server software, but they're not going to be doing any type of work. They're just kind of there for standby purposes. So looking at our primary nodes here, you can see that we're going to have one locally attached SSD drive that is going to be used to house the TempDB database only. Then we're going to have Azure Premium Storage that is going to be used to house our data files and our log files. And this storage account here is going to be configured to utilize locally redundant storage. So basically what this means is that our data and log files are each going to be replicated 3 times within that same data center. We're then going to have a storage account that is going to be utilized for our backup files. And for this particular storage account, we can configure this to use local redundant storage, zone redundant storage, or read access geo-redundant storage. So the key things to take away from the general purpose architecture is just to note that for number one, we're going to have one primary replica, and then we're going to have some standby nodes that are there just in case there is a issue with the primary replica. Then they're going to be there to take over for us. Number two, we're only going to have one local SSD drive that is used to house TempDB. So all of our user databases, the data and the log files will all be stored in remote storage. So as we take a look at the business critical tier now, we can see that things now start to change some. So we still have our application here that is going to connect out to the gateway control ring, and then from there it's then going to connect to the primary replica. But now, as we can see here, the 4 nodes that we have now are all going to be configured as part of a always-on availability group. The other thing to note here is that now we have our SSD drive for TempDB and SSD drives for our data files and log files. So in the business critical tier, we no longer have a concept of remote storage here. So all of our storage now is all locally attached. So that is ultimately going to provide us with higher IOPS here. The other thing to note is that since each of our nodes here are all configured to be part of a always-on availability group, each of these nodes is going to have their own storage, and they're all going to be kept in sync with the primary replica. So in the event that there was some type of issue with the primary replica, the failover time is going to be much, much faster here because each of our replicas already has their own storage and it's going to be up to date. And then we still have our backup files that are going to be stored inside of a storage account that you can configure to have local redundant storage, zone redundant storage, or read access geo-redundant storage. So the other thing that you are going to get with the business critical tier is you're going to have the option to enable zone redundancy here. So looking at our architecture diagram here, we can see some key differences. So we still have our 4 replicas here. They all still have that local storage here, but one of the key differences that we're going to note here is that now each of our replicas are spread out across multiple different availability zones. In addition to the actual replicas being spread out to multiple different AZ zones, we can also see that our gateway control rings has now been replicated to each of our availability zones, thus eliminating the risk for a single point of failure here. And then at the very top here, we can see that we have introduced an Azure Traffic Manager here. And basically what this is going to do is it's going to accept our connections from the application, and then it's going to route that connection to the proper AZ zone to get to the proper replica here. So for those of you with use cases where you have to ensure that your infrastructure is going to be zone redundant, the business critical tier is going to be the only option to provide you with that type of redundancy. So the next thing that we want to take a look at here is some of the different hardware options that we're going to get for both of the general purpose tiers and the business critical tiers. So looking at this chart right here, we can see that for the standard series Gen 5 hardware here, you're going to have a minimum of 4 vCores up to a maximum of 80 vCores. So for both of the two tiers, these are going to be your options here for the number of vCores. But as we start to move over to the premium series hardware and the memory optimized hardware, this is where we're going to start to see some of the key differences here. Now, the diagram here doesn't do a great job of identifying what can be utilized for each of the two different tiers, so I'll break it down for you. The general purpose tier utilizing the premium series infrastructure is going to allow you to provision anywhere from 4 vCores to 80 vCores. Now, if you was to go with general purpose and memory optimized hardware, you can only go up to 64 vCores in that particular option. And I'll go out to the Azure portal for you guys so you can kind of see these options here. But the business critical tier for the premium series hardware and the memory optimized hardware is each going to allow you to scale up to 128 vCores. So real quick, let's jump over into the Azure portal really quick. So I'm on the Azure portal here for my Azure SQL managed instance here, and we can see that for general purpose tier with standard series hardware, the maximum number of vCores that we can actually get here is going to be 80 vCores, and the same is going to apply here for the business critical tier. So we can still go up to 80 vCores here for the standard series hardware. Now, the differences come when we start to look at the premium series hardware. So general purpose premium series here, we can see that we can still only go up to 80 vCores here, and for the memory optimized version, we can only go up to 64 vCores here. But if we were to choose to go with the business critical tier, the premium series hardware is going to allow us to scale up to 128 vCores, and the memory optimized option here will also let us scale up to 128 vCores. So for those particular use cases, when you have a very, very high compute intensive workload and you need to have more than 80 vCores, that may be one of the key reasons why you might want to consider going with the business critical tier and choosing either the premium series hardware or the memory optimized hardware. The next thing that we want to take a look at here is anytime that you choose the business critical tier, it's going to provide you with the ability to utilize a read-only replica for no additional cost. So when we looked at the architecture here, we kind of talked about how we're going to have multiple different replica nodes that are all going to be part of a always-on availability group. Now, as a part of this AG group, you're going to have one replica that is going to be utilized for your read and write workloads. But then you can utilize one of your secondary replicas for those read-only workloads. So if we look at this diagram here, we can kind of see that we have two applications here, a analytics application and a transactional application. So the way that this would work is the transactional application would talk to the gateway here, and it would tell the gateway, hey, I need to connect to the Azure SQL managed instance here, and I need to perform read-write workloads. So then the gateway would then redirect the application to the primary replica so that it can perform both read and write workloads. Whereas our analytics application would talk to the gateway and say, hey, I need to talk to the Azure SQL Managed Instance, but I only need to do read-only workloads. So then the gateway would point our application to talk to one of the secondary replica nodes. So this is going to be a great option for those particular use cases when you may have some workloads that are doing things such as analytics or running reports, and they don't need to do both read and write workloads. So you can offload those particular workloads to one of your secondary replicas, thus reducing your resource requirements on the primary replica. This could actually lead you to reducing the number of vCores that you have for your primary replicas, thus reducing your overall cost. And the last thing that I would like to take a look at here is pricing options for each of these two tiers. So for this, I'm just going to jump over to the pricing calculator really quick. And once I am logged in here to the pricing calculator, I'm just going to do a quick search here for Azure SQL Managed Instance. And then I'm going to add in two occurrences here for Azure SQL Managed Instance. So for the first one right here, I'll just leave this as East US, Managed Instance, Local Redundant Storage, General Purpose Tier. And I'm going to change my instance count here to 4 vCores. And that is all we're going to change on that one. But then on my next one here, I actually want to change this to the business critical tier. And then once again, I'm going to drop my instance count down to 4 vCores. So the key thing that I had wanted to notate here is that the business critical tier costs more than 2 times the general purpose tier. So it's going to be really important to ensure that you choose the proper tier for your particular workloads. General purpose tier is going to be best for the majority of applications, as it's going to provide you with performance that can meet or exceed most of your requirements. The business critical tier is really designed for those particular applications that have very high I/O requirements. So just to kind of recap here, the business critical tier is going to be ideal for those particular applications where you need to ensure that you have a high number of IOPS, or there could be a requirement where you have to ensure that your infrastructure is going to be zone redundant, or maybe you have a use case where you could really take advantage of that read-only replica. So these are some of the key things that you want to consider when choosing between the general purpose tier or the business critical tier. But once again, the general purpose tier is going to meet the performance needs for most applications out there. All right, guys. Well, that is it for today. I hope that you guys learned some valuable information here to assist you with your choice of utilizing the general purpose tier or the business critical tier. So before you guys leave, remember to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Until next time, guys, peace.